And there was a real battle at the board. But I remember one of my board members, when there was this battle, said, "Be quiet. If the founder of the company trusts her baby to this man, we should trust her." And that was it. So the board got behind me and we agreed to do the CEO transition to him.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Succession podcast, where we dive deep into the pivotal journey of founder CEOs who face the critical decision: should you continue leading your business or bring in a new leader? I'm your host, Evgeny Shechnev. As a founder coach and author specializing in CEO succession, I interview founders, chief executives, and investors who share their stories of navigating this transition. Today, I'm speaking with Alicia Navarro, founder and the first CEO of Skimlinks, a content monetization platform that she founded in 2008. After running the business for over a decade, Alicia came to the realization that while she's very proud of what the company had achieved under her watch, in order to keep scaling and keep growing, it would benefit from a different kind of a leader. At that point, she promoted her chief revenue officer, Seb, to the CEO position, and Seb took the company to a successful exit 2 years later. Enjoy the conversation. Hello, Alicia. Great to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Evgeny. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and be part of your incredible mission.
Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation because I know you've got an incredible story to tell. You founded Skimlinks, a company that built a really cool product, grew quickly, and then exited several years after it was founded. But let's start at the beginning. What is Skimlinks and why did you found it?
Skimlinks is, because it's still very much going strong, is a content to commerce monetization platform that helps publishers make money from commerce content. So you probably see all those search results that talk about gift guides, top 10 lists, product reviews, etc. Skimlinks became a way that type of content became both a source of revenue for publishers as well as a source of inbound traffic. So it became just a very ubiquitous and popular form of monetization for media companies and publishers around the world. And I started it. Oh, go on.
So if I Google something like top 10 the Christmas gift ideas and I like something and I click on it and buy it, the publisher will have an easy way to get some affiliate revenue thanks to Skimlinks.
Exactly. Affiliate commission had always been around. That was always a way that you could make revenue from talking about products on your site. The innovation that Skimlinks scaled and really made into a ubiquitous form of monetization is that it automated that process for the publisher and made it into a really simple and purely incremental way of making money. So from a publisher's perspective, you just had to write that content and link directly to the product. And we would do all the back end, finding out the best way to monetize that link, automatically adding the appropriate tracking, collating and aggregating all the data so that you could do analysis on what kind of products people were buying from your site, what pages were performing particularly well. We aggregated all the payments. So it just made what used to be an incredibly manual process into very, very automated and optimized process. So it became very much a no-brainer for publishers to make money. And yes, you would have encountered it when you do a search for, top 10 or just, gift ideas for brother-in-law who likes gardening. And pretty much all the search results that you will see now on Google are pages that probably are monetized with Skimlinks.
Wow. It means you've got a really, really big market because there is a lot of content on the internet. There are lots of links to products and there are lots of publishers looking for an easy way to monetize what they're doing.
Interestingly, though, it was a very difficult product to begin with because when we first started, most publishers, respected mainstream publishers really turned their nose down at affiliate marketing as a way of making money. It was something that at the time when we first started that really grimy, publishers or dodgy blogs would use to make money, and mainstream publishers like The Guardian or The Telegraph or Condé Nast would never have thought to do it, both because it was such a small amount of revenue compared to what they used to be able to make through big sponsored ad deals. But also there was a very strong perspective from the journalists and content people that you should never monetize content. And so the journey that Skimlinks had was to educate the market as to how it could be done with a lot of integrity, and how it opened up the possibility not only for an incremental revenue stream, which at scale was significant, but a lot of people were searching for that kind of content. And so it became a really cost-effective way for publishers to get traffic from their site without having to rely on Facebook or Google, for that kind of traffic historically. And so now a lot of publishers realize that commerce content is a revenue source that also brings you organic traffic. It's a double whammy.
You were the founding CEO and you led the company for several years, but you were not the CEO at the moment of the exit of the business.
Yep.
Tell us the story of you coming to a decision to hire another CEO.
So I ran the company for 11 years. And I think I did a really great job because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we weren't solving a problem that people already knew that they had. We were solving a problem that publishers didn't even know that they had, with a solution that they didn't really understand. And so to get from 0 to 1 in that kind of world requires a certain type of founder, one that's really, I guess, charismatic, that understands like storytelling and getting people to try something out and to feel that sense of FOMO that comes if you're not doing what other publishers are doing. And I think I was naturally very good at that. I love storytelling. I love brand building. I'm really great at early products. I was able to really intuitively understand what the product needed to be and where it should go. I was really good at early hiring. Even today, 15 years on, out of my first sort of 20 hires, 50% of them are still working now, like 10 to 15 years later. So really great at early hiring, really great at culture. At the time, I was doing a lot of talks about culture because while now it's a lot more common for companies to realize the importance of culture, 15 years ago, it was a lot newer. And I think Skimlinks was quite a pioneer at the time for how you can really make what was essentially quite an unsexy business into an incredibly compelling and transformative place to work for employees by creating a culture that was nurturing, that really focused on camaraderie building, on learning and development. And so I was really great at that. We expanded to San Francisco and then to New York. We managed to convince pretty much every major publisher to work with us. It was very successful. But after 11 years, there was a few things going on. I was tired. Like 11 years is a long time to have that amount of pressure on your shoulders. The industry, the ecosystem had also changed. We had had quite a few acquisition offers over the years, which we had turned down, thinking that we could do a lot better. And then all around us, the IPO market had evolved, and companies like Criteo's IPO had not been as successful as they had hoped. And so we were very aware that the likelihood of an acquisition that would be valued at strategic valuations was much lower. It was very likely to be valued at EBITDA multiples. And we'd hit profitability, but in order to get the kind of exit that we wanted, we knew that we had to be very profitable. And running a company with the goal of EBITDA maximization was just something that, as a 0 to 1 founder, was going to be hard for me. I could do it. My board had, wanted me to do it. And I felt a certain responsibility to do that. But when I spent, there was a heaviness that I felt when I contemplated what the next few years of that kind of work and that kind of goal would do for me. And not only was it something that I didn't feel up for, but I also recognized that I was never going to be the best in the world at that. And I felt no shame about that. I know that I'm a brilliant early stage founder. And I think that the skills that you need to be a 0 to 1 are just very different from what it takes to get 1 to N. And EBITDA maximization is very much about operations and processes and structure and finances, and they were not my skills. And so I recognized that that wasn't something I was up for doing, nor thought was in the best interest of the company. And keep in mind that pretty much all my financial, wealth in the world was locked up in this company. I wanted it to succeed. And that required a level of humility, I guess. And I didn't need to be the one to lead it. I knew I had done a good enough job already. So it was time for someone else to come in. So I went to my board and said, right, I think it's time. Here's the reasons why. I think it's time that we find someone else. And they were, upset, I guess, initially. I remember one of my investors said to me, VCs will instantly discount the valuation of the company on their books by 30% when a founder says that they're going to leave, because the likelihood that they will succeed after that is reduced, which I thought was interesting. But I said, look, I'm very motivated to make this a successful transition. I want to spend some time thinking about who the right person is. And I realized that the right person was right in front of me. We had hired a chief revenue officer called Seb, and he had done a really great job of coming in and turning what our very relationship-based sales operations were into a much more automated, structured, process-driven, number-driven process. He'd done a great job of that. And he also knew the company, he knew the team, he had the respect of the team. Our customers knew him. He didn't have experience of being a CEO. He was still relatively young. But I just had a feeling that he would be the right person for the reasons I had mentioned. And so I talked to him about it. And initially he was, quite shocked and flattered and thought about it. But initially he said yes. And then he changed his, there was a bit of toing and froing. But we got to a good place with him. But then it was the board, and the board, when I presented him as an option, were initially very nervous about it, because they said, look, if we're going to go through a CEO transition, why not use this as an opportunity to get a much more seasoned, older, gray-haired CEO involved? Let's go through a proper process. Let's do this with due diligence. And I said, I don't agree. I think that if we go through that process, A, we might lose him as a candidate. And B, I just don't think that a company like Skimlinks, that is so relationship oriented and culture oriented, that getting someone else external is going to be as effective. It will mean a much longer onboarding time and a much bigger risk that it will not be successful. Whereas someone internal that the team already know, that the customers already know, it's just much more likely to be a success. And I trust him. I know him. I think we should do this. And there was a real battle at the board. But I remember one of my board members, when there was this battle, said, be quiet. If the founder of the company trusts her baby to this man, we should trust her. And that was it. So the board got behind me and we agreed to do the CEO transition to him.
Yeah. Well, so it was a real story of first trusting an insider that you knew and persuading the board to take your perspective on this. Alicia, I'm curious about how you opened up this conversation with the board in the first place. Did you speak to all of them at the board meeting or one of them informally at first? How did you choose to navigate the initial conversation?
It's been quite a few years, so I don't remember precisely the details. I did have early discussions with my more trusted board members, the ones that would have seen me as their friend as well. So I had that early discussion just to get a feel for how they would respond. It's good practice anyway. Very rarely should you spring the board news that they have not heard elsewhere. But as a board discussion, it was, I think that they were aware that I was having doubts. Some of them knew that I wanted to make this transition, but for some of them, the board discussion was the first time that they knew that I had made that decision and that we were going to progress with that.
Yeah. So you started having informal conversations with people you trusted on the board before bringing it to the entire board.
That's correct. Yeah.
Way. Yeah. And when you thought about when you made this decision initially, was there a specific moment or trigger that really crystallized this decision for you?
Mm. I think it became a very physical thing. I think that I'm so used to, as founders are, powering through and steamrolling over any physical limitations that I feel. I think that I think the relationship I was in at the time, I think it was him that really brought it to my attention because he said, I see you sleeping. I'm aware that you are really struggling physically with this. And that was, I think, the trigger. It was the sense of, gosh, this is not just something that's impacting the business, it's starting to impact me physically. And that was very much the trigger.
Yeah. So just the realization of the impact that running the company for 11 years had on you on a physical level.
And also the stress that operating outside my comfort zone or zone of genius had on me. I think that that's a key part of it. I could have done it. I could have stayed on, and it probably could have been still a success. It probably would have still been a success, but it would have been very hard on me because operating in a area that is not aligned with where my strengths lie requires an enormous exertion of effort. And I could do it. I was capable and smart and networked, and I could have got the right coaches, but the exertion would have been all encompassing. And I think that the knowledge of that the premeditation knowledge of that was what was causing me to sleep poorly and grind my teeth. And I think it was the nervousness that
Yeah.
I don't know if I am up for this degree of discomfort and effort that made me realize there are people that are naturally gifted at this
Yeah.
phase that would probably find those first 10 years really hard, whereas I found them very joyous and very much aligned with where my strengths lie. So it made sense. Seb and I used to talk about this concept of sequential founders rather than parallel. So this idea of, wouldn't it be great that rather than two founders that start at the same time, you have founders that operate one after the other. So a 0 to 1 and then a 1 to N. And it's more like a relay. So I do the first bit and then pass the baton onto my co-founder who operates after me as opposed to in parallel with me.
Yeah. And how do you see this transition point between 0 to 1 and 1 to N? What defines the moment when things change so much that it makes sense to you bring in a person with a different skills?
I think it's unlikely to be a binary point. It's very much, there's a zone where you're mindful that you are operating in a zone that's outside your zone of genius, and that's requiring so much exertion that you are not at your best. I was very aware, and maybe it comes from being a woman or just, I don't know what it was, but I was aware that I would be holding the company back if I stayed on. And I loved the company too much to do that to the company. The founder's job is what's the best thing for the company. And when you come to a realization where the best thing for the company is not you, then it's your job to make that transition.
And that's a really, really important point because quite often when founders get to the realization that they should bring in a new CEO, it feels like quitting or some kind of a failure. And it can be seen this way from the outside. Whereas the reality is what you've just outlined. Our job as founders and CEOs is to do the right thing. And sometimes the best thing that we can do for the company is to acknowledge that someone else is going to be a better leader going forward.
The tricky zone is somewhere in the middle where, yes, it might be better to bring in someone that can do the 1 to N bit very well. But if you do that too early, before you've got product market fit, before your culture is well developed, before the team are really well entrenched, the loss of a founder can also result in a loss of the momentum that keeps the company going through those early hard phases. I think that that's why a lot of VCs will put in reverse vesting clauses to founders when they make that investment, because they recognize that if a founder leaves too early on, that can have a knock-on effect if the team's culture has not been fully entrenched. And I think that's what founders often will worry about, and certainly investors will worry about. That will the founder's departure result in other key team members also resigning? Will it result in a loss of momentum? Will it result in, you know, eh, the diminishment of other aspects of the business, like difficulty fundraising or difficulty with product? And so there is a bit of a conflict there where the founder's role often is emblematic, and their departure can precipitate a decline of culture and momentum. I think in the case of Skimlinks, while I was worried about that briefly initially, I was also aware that the company was in an incredibly good place to handle that kind of transition. The senior management team were exceptional. The culture was like 10 years, 11 years entrenched. Like, we knew who we were. The team were able to hire new people in that was consistent with the culture. The product had product market fit. It was a safe time to do so. I think that too early on, it can be disastrous to a company, and I think that's why some investors are very against it in those early years.
Yeah. So founders can bring a lot of value to the table for exactly for the reasons that you've described.
I think that there is a middle phase. If a founder recognizes that they are no longer the best at the CEO job, there is also another step in between before departure, which can be bringing in, for example, an incredibly competent COO or managing director that can take over the management, the day-to-day management of operations, scaling, admin, etc., which often a lot of founders are not naturally good at. And they can stay on in a more ceremonial role of, content marketing, brand building, relationship building, sales, culture, fit, interviews. There's still a role for the founder in those early years, even if it's too early for the company to survive their full departure.
And speaking of which role did you hold after you stepped down? Did you leave the business completely, or did you stay involved in some other capacity?
So we negotiated and arranged, I think, a fantastic transition. So I stayed on the board until we got acquired. So there was a 2-year period from when I left to when we got acquired. I remained on the board throughout that time. And during that time, my role transitioned to president, which was, again, as I say, more ceremonial. I think that we probably made a mistake, and Seb and I have talked about this, that role was not a little bit more involved. I wanted it to be, but CEO transitions can be complex, and it's a lot easier to assess these things in retrospect. But I think that leveraging the sort of storytelling, personality cult aspect of a founder can be very useful, and that there is a role for that. In our case, it was more of a ceremonial role, so I still was able to, if anyone in the team required coaching or advice, I provided that. If there was customers that wanted introductions to the team, I provided that. And I was, so that was a role that I retained until we got acquired.
Yeah. So you were part of the board, you were available to support the team if necessary, but it was not a strictly defined role with, let's say, certain targets or certain responsibilities on a weekly basis.
Correct. I was not involved in the operations of the business from the day after I stepped down.
Yeah. And how did the transition go from you to Seb between the moment that the board committed to it and the moment that you became a president?
So there was a period of maybe 6 weeks, I think, of the board and me and Joe, my co-founder, chose that it felt like the right time. So we both decided to leave at the same time, and we did it together. It was very neat. And so we had about a 6-week period where we just kind of arranged the details of what that departure would look like. And they also in parallel negotiated with Seb what his package would look like. So there was parallel private negotiations for each of us, sort of financially and from a job perspective. But once that was agreed, which was an unpainful process, the whole process actually was incredibly respectful, professional, caring. I have no complaints about it whatsoever. I was very happy with everything that we agreed. And once that was agreed, it was time then to plan the actual announcement to both the team, to customers, and to the press. So Seb and Joe and I worked on what that announcement would look like. I ended up very much like Seb and I would rehearse together, like how we would tell the team. And it was so funny because I was very emotional. And every time I would practice what I was going to say, I would start crying. And he'd say, no, you can't be crying because it's a happy thing, right? This is what you want. And it's for the team. You've got to and I was like, I know, it's just I'm emotional. So rehearsal was valuable. And I got to the point where I was able to convey what I was actually feeling, which was sadness that I was leaving my baby, but also joy that we had arrived at such a positive transition. And once we rehearsed that, I basically pre-wrote all the announcements to the team, to customers, to the press. And yeah, I remember going in that day in April of 2018. I knew it was going to be my last day. We called the team to make an announcement. Oh no, actually, sorry, I lied. The few days beforehand,
Mm.
I took aside my oldest employees, like the ones that I had hired and that had been with the company for a long time, and I told them personally. I wanted, my very dear friends slash team members to be told directly by me. So once those key people had been told, it was the day of the wider announcement. We called the team together. I made the announcement. I welcomed Seb. He said his piece, and we had arranged for there to be a celebration. So suddenly champagne and food came out, and we ended up having, an all-night celebration. And then I left the office that evening and didn't come back.
Yeah. Wow. So it was a really fast transition. So basically, you made the announcement and then you left
Well,
your role almost
the
immediately.
beauty of it is it was an internal person. He already knew what he was doing. Seb was already in the company. He knew the team. He knew the customers. He knew the systems. He knew it all. There was no detailed handover that was required. And Seb was also very eager that for the team's sake, that it was a very clean transition. He was concerned that me lingering around might make his new role more difficult or confusing for the team. And I understood, because one of the other reasons I wanted to make this transition and why I chose Seb was that I recognized that to go from a very product driven and relationship driven company to an EBITDA and process driven company required not only a change of leader, but a change of culture. I had spent the last 10 years talking about culture and how cultures are created. So I knew that a culture is the manifestation of the behaviors of the leader. It's what the leader is seen to do, what they're seen to prioritize, who they're seen to reward, what values they're seen to celebrate. And that transition could only happen if there was no ambiguity about who the leader was. I needed to step away fully for Seb to have a chance to create a new culture that was optimized for the goals that we wanted for the company.
Yeah. Sometimes the best thing we can do for the success of the next leader is to get out of the way and
Yeah. And again, through this whole thing, I was just very comfortable with the role that I had had. I was incredibly proud of everything that I achieved. There was I didn't have anything else to prove. So I was very happy to step back and hand the baton to someone that I had chosen and that I trusted, and be the cheerleader on the board that supported him and the team to success.
And how did the team respond to the news? What was their reaction?
I think that they were very sad, obviously, to see me go. I think that there was a massive sort of correlation between Skimlinks, the brand, and Alicia, the brand. And so there was um, sadness, I guess, especially, I was liked by the team. And I think there was a sense that, oh, that's a shame. She's lovely. I hope. Um, but I think that they understood my reasons. And again, there was no sense of abandonment. I'd done 11 years. Everyone had seen how hard I worked and how much I had done for the company. So there was no anger. I think there was, for some people, a nervousness because a culture change is always going to work better for some people more than others. And again, that was part of the reason I made the choice I did. I knew that we needed a culture change in order to be a more EBITDA driven, process driven, structure driven company. And that, like me, there would be others in the company that would not be up for that type of culture change. And as always, there's changes, there's people that chose to leave afterwards. Again, no animosity, it's just a very natural transition. And the people that remained were emboldened by what Seb now wanted to do with the company and stayed on. And it's a real mark of his, success, or the success of both of us, really, that so many people from that were working for me at the time are still working for the company, 4 years on. The company's now gone through 2 acquisitions. So the company that acquired Skimlinks was acquired a year after that. And so, my team have done very well. They have been given, retention bonuses by 2 companies, plus the stock options that they earned directly from the company. And I'm just delighted by that. Like, that was always my goal, that, I create not just a company, but a tribe of people whose lives and careers are made better because they had worked at Skimlinks at some stage.
So let's talk about the first exit. It happened 2 years after you stepped down, if I
Mhm.
remember correctly.
Correct. Yes.
So what was the story of Skimlinks after Seb was appointed as the new CEO?
So he had the remit to really focus on, revenue, like profits. So a lot of what he did was managing a lot of the re-architecture of the platform, because there'd been a lot of tech debt accumulated over the last decade. We hired a team of remote developers that were geared with the responsibility of re-architecting a lot of the code. Again, that's not my strong suit. I love products. I love new building. He was really great at, how do you optimize code? How do you streamline operations? How do you make things faster, lighter, better? And that really played to his strengths. So that was one of the key projects he did. And then he also just really optimized the sales machine and brought in a lot of structure and rigor and process. And as a result of that, he did a great job. He really massively increased the profitability of the company. By the time that we got acquired, we were very, very profitable. And then obviously in the 6 months after acquisition, because that was peak COVID, we tripled in profit even after that.
Yeah. So it sounds like there were 2 distinct phases of company growth. You created the foundation, you built the product, you defined the culture, you built something that worked. And then Seb, as the one-to-end CEO, optimized things, made sure that it not only worked, it worked very efficiently and resulted in a healthy product, sorry, healthy profit. And then it led to an exit 2 years later, just before COVID.
Correct.
Yeah. And when you look back at this entire transition, now with the benefit of hindsight and just a richer perspective, now that there is a distance of a few years, what would you do differently? What would you have done differently?
I was thinking about this question before today, and my first answer is really not much. I was really pleased with how everything played out that I had control over. I think, and Seb and I have talked about this afterwards. I think in retrospect, we probably should have defined a way that I could have remained involved in a supportive manner for him, because while he was brilliant at making the company very profitable, he his strength was not necessarily in the storytelling, relationship building, brand building, like the mythology around a company that is often underappreciated in the role that it plays in creating a good valuation at exit. So I think that, he did a great job of getting us a high EBITDA, which meant that we were valued at EBITDA multiples. I had turned down offers to buy Skimlinks 6 years prior when we were not profitable at all. That was twice as much as we got acquired for, because of the strategic value that I was able to build around the concept of Skimlinks. And so I think that, we both have reflected afterwards that there's a role for both profit and strategic narrative building in achieving the best exit outcome that one can.
So it sounds like there is a really important lesson here. When there is this transition from 0 to 1 CEO to 1 to N CEO, it's not that everything that was done by the 0 to 1 CEO suddenly becomes irrelevant. It needs to be integrated into the story of the company going forward, so that the company still has healthy culture, all the storytelling, the brand, everything that the founding CEO has built, but the efficiency of a grown-up company.
I think so, although I think the reality of making that work is very hard. And so I say that that could have been something we did differently, but even if I interrogate that further, the reality of it, I think would have been very difficult to achieve. Like, how could I have been involved in a way that did not step on Seb's toes? Or undermine him and his decisions. So I think that it's a really difficult thing to achieve. I think perhaps the answer is that I stay non-operational, but act in a sort of coach manner, perhaps, or with the new CEO, to supply him with other perspectives that can help him lead in a way that achieves both profit and strategic market value.
So, in other words, getting out of the way, not stepping on his toes, but still retaining a channel, a way to share your expertise, share everything that you've learned, to retain everything that you've built.
I think so. And perhaps it's more a guidance that I have to incoming CEOs, which is that the incoming CEOs should aim to not feel undermined by the founder. The best outcome can be achieved if you take the best bits of the founder and the best bits of the incoming CEO. And that a degree of humility is useful because the incoming CEO is able to take what made the magic happen in the early years and add that to the EBITDA maximization capabilities that they have. But it's great to say in theory, but I think in practice, it's phenomenally difficult, which is why it very rarely happens.
Yeah, it's phenomenally difficult indeed. And at the same time, when it does happen, it can be so valuable for the company going forward. Alicia, let's take one step back. You said that when the transition was happening, the board managed it really, really well. So there were negotiations between the board, you and Seb, and a lot of complexity, and you've done it well. Was there someone at the board level who was specifically tasked with orchestrating the transition?
Yes, yeah. So one of our board members, in fact, my first investor and longest standing board member, became the intermediary that negotiated each of our packages, and he did a great job.
Yeah. Can you tell more about their role? What did they do particularly well to make it a success?
I think probably not quibble over small things. Like, I had a 6-month notice period, which was honored. That was great. And then I was paid a ongoing president's salary for remaining on the board. There were certain things I was able to do around my stock options. I think basically they were very fair and respectful. I think that in a parallel universe, perhaps they could have used that period to gouge things back. But I think there was a lot of respect towards me and the effort that I had put in for the last 11 years. And there was nothing but respect and professionalism throughout the whole process.
Yeah, just treating everyone well, not quibbling over small things, and ultimately creating a win-win solution for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what happened after the exit? When the company was sold, was it the end of the story, end of your involvement, or there is a continuation after the company was sold?
Everything gone. I lost my email. I lost my everything. Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
It was a very surreal thing. One of the strangest things that happens to me still is when I go onto LinkedIn and I see people I've never met from around the world, like from India and from Australia, post on LinkedIn photos of themselves hugging each other at trade fairs going, yay, Skimlinks. I'm like, wow, there's people that are celebrating working for a company that's still going on that I have literally nothing to do with. It's very surreal. Like you've created an entity that survives beyond one. But no, I've had no involvement in the company at all from the point of acquisition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you successfully built a business that is now standing on its own feet, that is growing, developing as part of a larger entity, and continues on its mission without you leading it. And that's a success.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that, there's always times that I can go to myself, oh, we could have made more money if we had held out till, 6 months later, because, we thought the pandemic was going to be, no one knew really in like March, April of 2020 what was going to happen. So in retrospect, if we had held out for a little bit longer, we might have made more. And that can sometimes be a really frustrating thought. But I always conclude that it's not healthy to think that way. And the measure of success is, do I have to worry about money anymore now? Not really. And did I create something that is indisputably a success? And the answer is yes. Like it's a product that is bigger now than it was when I started it. The core team is still there. The people that used to work for me have gone on to do incredible things. Skimlinks is still a well-regarded brand. Like, there's nothing to be sad or ashamed about. It's brilliant. Yeah.
Indeed. And what advice would you give to founders who might be in a similar situation to you in 2017, when you were thinking about possibly stepping down, but you haven't fully committed to it yet?
It helped me to imagine who would be the next person to take the baton. At the time, I spoke not just to Seb, but actually there was a couple of other people that I met with on an exploratory basis. But very quickly, I came to the conclusion that Seb was the right person. And knowing that made it easier to begin that process of transition.
So,
So did that answer the question? Sorry.
so you focused very quickly on the right successor, and the fact that he was an insider made it so much easier.
For me, yes. I think that will not always be the case for some companies, and that they will need to find someone external. If I was to do this again now, that's probably the process that I would go through, which is start thinking, who might that next person be? What characteristics will they have? What strengths do they have? What would work well with the team? And I start to visualize what that person might be like. Again, that's just how I think. I'm a quite visual, kind of creative person. So it was useful for me to create the image of my successor and then look around for who that might be. And the reason that's also quite useful is that when you're in that exploratory creative state, opportunistic things sometimes pop up that you might not have otherwise done if you had not been in that open exploratory state. And I think there's a bit of magic in that kind of process. I think that a CEO transition very rarely comes across from an executive search. I could not imagine doing an executive search for my successor. I think the successor is probably already known to you, or is at most one degree of separation from you. Because I think having that depth of experience and relationship is useful. And you can start to sort of explore, would this be something you'd be interested in? If this was something that you would do, and having those, having a few of those conversations at the same time can sometimes unveil the right person or an unexpected person. So I think if I was to do it again, that's kind of the process I would go through.
And this also makes me think of people who are considering taking over from founder CEO as an incoming CEO. And when they ask me, how do I do it? How do I find the right opportunity? I always tell them, maybe don't bother too much with the executive search. Be within the trusted circle of the outgoing CEO so that you were the most obvious choice. But of course, being at the right place at the right time is incredibly difficult. So there is an element of luck here as well.
That's what I mean about the magic. Like, I think that there is a process of playing and exploring. And so if you are a CEO that wants to go in, it's about befriending a network of founders and starting to put it out there that this is something that you might be interested in, because people talk, as you know, Evgeny, like our founders talk, and they'll say, oh, I'm thinking about this. I don't really know who I should go for. I don't really know how I should do it. And then you'll say, oh, actually, I just met someone yesterday that could be amazing. Do you want to meet them? And almost always, I think that's how it goes. So I think it's about putting the word out there mutually and starting to see what, God, this is so wanky, the universe brings to you.
Yep, I know what you mean. Alicia, and if you think about investors involved in this process, what would you like them to know if there is a CEO succession
Yeah.
happening in their portfolio?
I think that a lot of investors are very against it because of the reasons I said earlier, that they instantly discount the valuation or exit potential of a company once the founder has left. And I don't know why they think that, because I think that if it's done really well, it's it's a great thing for the company. Um, I happen to be a success story, I think, but there's probably a lot of cases where it is not a success, where the incoming CEO does not honor the magic that the departing CEO, the departing founder had brought to the company, where the loss of the founder precipitates other people, other key employees leaving. So I think that from a investor perspective, they're probably a bit burnt, but there's ways that it can work. And I think rather than them seeing it as a negative thing that they have to deal with, if they can see it as a very natural and expected and positive thing that if well run is a net positive for everyone, then they can be a part of the process. Because I think the risk is that the founder does not do it, they get burnt out. And actually, a burnt out, broken founder is even worse for the company than a poorly managed CEO transition.
Yep, that's the truth that a lot of burnt down founders know firsthand.
I know, but it's so crazy to me that they don't know it. That a lot of investors don't know it. They'll insist on things like reverse vesting clauses that which I also understand, because it would be really bad if they put a lot of money into the company and then a year later they leave and they have to bring in a new CEO at an early stage. So I understand reverse vesting at an early stage. That makes sense. I think at a later stage, it does not. And I think a more open exploration or acknowledgement that, look, we've invested in you because it's your vitality, it's your creativity, it's your magnetism, it's your vision that we're investing in. And when it's the right time to bring in a more operational, later stage CEO, let us know and let us be part of that process to help you with that transition. I think that would take so much load off a founder's shoulders, because they can then have that discussion a lot more openly. And the alternative is that the founder will burn out in silence for fear of making the investors scared and not support the company financially if they need it.
And that's maybe the biggest lesson of all. The sooner we
Mm.
start the conversation, the sooner we as founders build a trusted relationship with the investors,
Yeah.
the easier it will be to avoid all negative scenarios here by acknowledging that staying as long as possible is not necessarily a success. Stepping down is not necessarily a failure. It really depends on specific circumstances, and just need to have a dialogue.
And I think it's such a mistake to assume that a founder is going to naturally scale as a great operational CEO. I, I know that I'm not. I am not a great process-driven operator. It has never been my strength. It never will be.
Yeah.
I am brilliant at the creative early stages. Inevitably, there will be a day when, even now with Flown, that I will hand the baton over to someone that is better at this stage. And my dream of it would be that I'm still involved on the product, creative, brand, and sales side, which is where I naturally excel.
I know what you mean so well, because this is precisely the reason why I'm not running my own company anymore, and I'm so happy to see the new CEO doing a much better job than I could ever do. Alicia, as we're preparing to start wrapping up today, what else would you like to share with our listeners on the topic that is important but we haven't touched on yet? Or any parting thoughts?
um, Yeah, I think that the other really important point is preemptive succession planning. With Skimlinks, my successor came internally. And I think one of the things that that has taught me is the importance of planning ahead and having a legion of people within the company already that you are silently grooming to be potential CEOs of the company one day. That's just great for those individuals' career development. If you say to them, look, I think you are capable of being a leader of the company one day. Maybe it's this company, maybe it's another, but I think that's your future. And I'm going to spend the next year or two just, quietly mentoring and coaching you on the skills that will allow you to one day take over from a founder one day. And I think doing that preemptively, it means that that future transition and with an internal hire is so much easier, and it's just a fantastic learning and development opportunity for your existing team.
And an opportunity to build trust with a potential successor,
Yeah,
because you really want to know the person that you are trusting your baby to.
exactly. Yeah, I think it's just such a great strategy that a lot of people don't think about, but I love thinking about that. Because I think part of my joy of building companies is watching talented people come into their power. And so being, an agent for that is just a real honor and joy. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Alicia, thank you so much for this conversation. I found it really interesting, and I'm sure that our listeners will take a lot from it.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure, Evgeny. Thank you.
To wrap up this conversation, I would like to offer a reflection as a coach who often sees similar situations. This is a classic case of a transition from a founder CEO or 0 to 1 CEO, as Alicia called it, to a scale-up CEO or a 1 to N CEO. It's not an easy transition to make, and as Alicia shared in this conversation, there were some challenges. But at the same time, the risks of the company being run by a burnt out and disengaged founder are even greater. So often at this stage, especially if the company is 7-10 years old, founders really have to face one of the two transitions. Either they step into the scale-up CEO role, learn to operate differently, learn to apply different skills, and find a new wave of energy to carry them forward for the next few years. Or they orchestrate a transition to a different person with the necessary skill set for the next stage of growth of the business, just like Alicia has done. There is no right or wrong answer here. It's just different options that work in different ways for different people. I hope you found our conversation useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe on the platform where you are watching or listening to this, and speak to you soon.